All right. So first question: did you enlist or were you drafted?
I was drafted.
Okay. What were your thoughts when you were first drafted?
How could this be me? I was in college and I was in my senior year, and the draft board that I was in ran out of people. So at that time, the deferment was going to college.
No. Okay.
But when they ran out of people, they started taking the people from college who were the oldest, and I fit into that category, and so I was drafted.
Okay. And then, like, when you're going off, what did your like family and friends think of you being sent off?
Well, at that time, it wasn't appreciated that we were in the war,
Mm-hmm.
and um, there wasn't a lot of good thinking about people who had to go in because they were fighting a war that nobody wanted to be in, and they were supposedly doing atrocities that nobody wanted to be connected with. So it wasn't really a great time. I mean, when you see nowadays that when you go to the airports and people are clapping and they were booing you and they were hissing you and it was pretty ugly.
Oh wow. And then, what were your first thoughts of the war?
I didn't think it was appropriate. I didn't think it was necessary, and it was something that I truly and honestly didn't want to go to because I didn't believe in killing.
Mm.
But I wasn't going to leave and not do my duty as a citizen. So I went in.
Yeah.
You don't have a lot of choices,
Yeah.
particularly when it's a draft. And we don't have a draft these days. People join, so they make a conscious choice.
Yeah.
I had no choice.
Mm-hmm. And then, what were you first like put into? What branch?
Navy, I enlisted.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of being drafted, which would have gone right into the Army, I enlisted to not do that and went into the Navy.
So when they called your name for the draft, you just went and enlisted.
Yes.
Right.
My dad called me because he got the letter at home. I was at school and said, "The letter is here. What do you want to do? Because I have to send it to you, and you have to, as soon as you get it, you have to acknowledge that you are now drafted." So I went and made a decision, went to the Navy, and joined.
Okay.
Didn't do a whole lot of thought about which branch.
Yeah. It's the best one to join. And like during the war, what did you mainly do?
Well, I started out and I went into basic training, and that was in Great Lakes, Illinois. And in Great Lakes, Illinois, during my basic training, they closed down the entire facility and cordoned it off because there were demonstrations all around the entire place against the war, and they were worried about enlistees going out and getting caught up into it and all of that, so they just basically closed all the gates and closed all the access until the demonstrations were over.
Oh wow. And then where were you first shipped to?
In the Navy, I went through basic. Then you can choose a school of choice. So I chose being a yeoman, which was personnel work, office work, that type of thing. And so they send you to school to learn how to do that. And so I went to Bainbridge, Maryland, to learn how to do that.
Okay. And what year were you enlisted? Also?
68 to 71.
Okay. So when was your like full time being in the war? How long did you serve till the end?
To the end of the war?
Yeah.
No, I got out before it was over. But it was slowly winding down at that time. They went into the lottery system after that, and so I think the lottery system was in place when I was leaving.
Okay. And then during the war after school, where'd you go to?
I stayed at nuclear power school in Bainbridge, Maryland, and worked in the office there and got transferred to in the enlisted office. Then I got transferred to the officers' school to be the yeoman in charge of their office
Okay, so
for the
you
rest of my time there, which was, I think, a 2 year, no, 1 year, 1.5 years stint, something like that.
yeah, so you stayed in America the whole time?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Alright.
Well, after I finished with nuclear power school, the thought again came up because several of the people who were guys that I was with were getting transferred to Vietnam, even though they were in the Navy, they were getting transferred there. And so I asked around what may keep me from going to Vietnam, and so I decided to, you had to ask to be in submarines, so I volunteered for submarine duty.
Okay, so did you ever go on the submarines?
Yes.
Where'd you, like, what was the route that they took? And,
Well, I went down to Key West, Florida, where I was based, and our duty down in Key West, Florida. Well, first of all, we were not in the nuclear boats; we were in the diesel boats, the older versions. Our duty was to go out and to be targets for newly commissioned surface ships or repaired surface ships, and it was a time when they could use these diesel boats to be underwater and for the newly commissioned ships try and find you. So we traveled all around the Caribbean and Atlantic and made stops in, different vacation spots now, but Jamaica and Dominican Republic and some other ones, and just to have a couple of days to refurbish and go back out to sea.
Right. So you would go around Caribbeans and American boats would you'd be testing them to see if they could find you?
Yes.
Oh, okay, so it's you'd be training the other boats?
Correct.
Okay.
They would actually fire dummy warheads at you, and you would, a perfect, which is kind of funny, a perfect miss was a perfect hit. But in those training exercises, we one time got hit.
Oh,
and it wasn't funny. When you're down 450 feet and you get hit with a dummy warhead, they still weigh a ton. And we surfaced and went back to port, and the two captains were quite angry at each other from how could anybody make that kind of a mistake.
So does it mean that the perfect miss is actually a hit?
I never did quite understand that. I mean, it was the operations officers and captains of both ships explaining to themselves how that worked. And I, as a peon, I did not know how that worked.
So, how long would the submarine stay underwater until you surfaced at a new location?
We'd be underwater for, I don't know, it's been a long time. I don't know how many hours, but diesel boats are limited to how long they can be underwater because they run by battery.
Yeah.
So you have to get up and at least snorkel so that you can bring in air to regenerate the batteries. So, yeah, you're not down like nuclear power boats where you're down for 3 months and you surface later and change crews and then go back out again.
So you'd go up every couple hours, or?
No, we could stay down for 12, 15 hours, but then you're really draining the batteries.
Yeah. And all submarines, they say that's the best job for the Army, or just for the overall Navy, Army, and Air Force, say that's the best because you're in the submarine. Would you agree with that?
No.
Oh, you
No, it's very crowded quarters. Sometimes you share bunks because there aren't enough bunks. It's you don't shower because we have no fresh water that we can spare to take showers. So, we'd be out for days and days and days and days and come back into port, and you'd finally be able to take a shower. And when you did, there'd just be like an oil slick coming off your body. And But no, and you'd smell like oil, and because these are the old boats, World War
Yeah.
II boats.
Okay. Then for all the ports you had stopped, like what would you do personally for like your days that you had off?
You don't do much. First of all, we were ported in Cuba, in Guantanamo Bay,
Okay.
which is all fenced off. You can't go anywhere in Cuba.
Yeah.
You're basically on a naval base, and there is absolutely nothing to do. A lot of times, there are other ships down there, and the crews would get together and play cards and that kind of stuff. But other than that, there was nothing to do.
Okay.
When you go to other ports, when you had liberty, you could walk around, see some different things. You always had to be a little careful because the times just weren't good for people in uniform at all,
Yeah.
because it just was not a good time that people thought that the war was a good thing to be doing.
So you'd say most people you ran into were very against the war.
Most,
Okay.
yeah. And when I got out and came back home, and there was no big crowd that said, "Hey, thanks for your service." And I don't think anybody said thanks for your service.
Yeah.
It was just kind of swept under the rug that you were out there, and
Yeah.
you just went on about your business, and you didn't really feel good about it.
Mhm.
You spent almost 4 years of your life, and you thought you did the right thing by staying and being in the service, and it was just scorned.
Yeah. Different time.
Very different. I'm glad to see it today. I always make sure I stop and say thanks for your service.
That's good. And then for like when you're on the submarines, what were the things that you had to do to keep the submarine in check? What was your personal job on the submarine?
My personal job, I was the only yeoman there, so I was doing all of the paperwork and all of the communications work for the captain, the XO, and anyone else that of an officer status that needed it done.
And then,
I
go
had,
ahead.
I
Sorry.
had a tiny little office where you had to sit in there and do all your work.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to keep care of all the records for all the personnel on the boat. So as they increased in rank, I would have to fill out all the paperwork to make sure they were sent in. I had to update their personnel jacket so that it was always kept up to date. Did all of the reviews typed up all the reviews for everybody and made sure those were in their files. So.
Oh wow. So you would be like the communications person aboard?
I'd be the enlisted personnel and administrative officer, our
Okay.
enlisted person.
Okay. Okay. And
When I went in and I was at nuclear power school, but because I had already 3.5 years of college, they tried to talk me into, why don't you just sign up and go back to OCS, Officers Canada School, and I would be able to get through it faster, but I would still have to do maybe 2.5 years, simply because I had missed all of the actual officer training courses. And I said, no, I don't really want to stay in
no.
any longer than I have to stay in, because once you graduate from Officer Canada School, you have to go in for a 4-year tour. So
Okay.
I just stayed enlisted.
Okay. So you were offered to be an officer, but that'd be
With the schooling, with
Yeah.
finishing the schooling. Yeah.
Okay. And then when you served, was there like call homes where you'd get call homes, like call your family and stuff like that? Or was that not really much of a thing?
It's not really much of a thing, because you'd always go back to home port, and then it was just like being at home. You don't live on the ship when you're in home
Yeah.
port. When I was in Key West, Florida, I lived in a house. And
Oh, okay. So Key West is your own personal house, or was it like
Yes.
one of the houses on base?
No, it was my own personal house.
Oh, okay. And then for coming back, you said that like a lot of people didn't like treat you, like they didn't thank you, but when you came back, how it was like? Did anything else change from what original life already was?
I'm not sure.
Like when you came back, did you just go back to normal life, just doing everything the same?
Well, I was married by then, but when I came back, life was thoroughly different
Mm-hmm.
because you you were let out of the service, but you didn't have anything
Yeah.
because you don't make any money in the military. So I was let out, but what do you do? I had no job.
Yeah.
I hadn't finished my education. I had a family. So what do? You immediately, I went back to St. Louis where I grew up and stayed with my parents for a month and then got an apartment. And in the meantime, spent every second looking for a job. Finally got just a job.
So back.
There wasn't anybody hurrying to hire vets or anything like that you kind of get used to today.
Yeah.
It wasn't like that back then. When you got out, you didn't wear your uniform home. You immediately just stuffed it in your duffel bag and hid your duffel bag and came home.
Mm-hmm. So, like, there's no veteran benefits like there are today, where like no discrimination.
You had VA benefits to
Okay.
go to school and things like that.
Yeah. But like in the workforce, there was none of that.
No.
Okay.
No, there was no desire to hire vets.
Okay.
And it was it was also just a bad reputation for vets at that time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you were probably carousing, you were probably on drugs, you were probably doing a lot of crazy stuff, so who wants to hire you when you get back? And a lot of them had a lot of problems that, you know, you work with and try and diagnose today, but then nobody really was thinking about it. There was no PSTD, and which was highly deserved by a lot of people.
Yeah.
But it didn't even exist back then. You just came home, and if you were nuts, you were nuts, and people really it really didn't catch on. And if you were in big trouble from different things that you experienced, nobody was looking out for you.
So you'd mainly just be on your own without your family, then it would just be entirely different.
Yeah, it was entirely different. I mean, you had to start from nothing and create a future.
Yeah. Right. And so you said you had a family.
Mm-hmm.
You married down in Florida?
Yes.
Okay.
Had a baby.
Mm-hmm. And then all in all, like, how'd you feel knowing that you served, even though many people, like, they tried to get out of the draft?
I'm glad I made the decision to stay and go.
Mm-hmm.
I am really proud of the people who are serving now. And I personally have a big distinction about going in the service at that time. And, you know, it kind of gets to me sometimes talking about it. But I think, you know, people say to just serve, and yes, I served. Mm-hmm. And yes, I went in. I didn't go to Vietnam.
Sure.
I consider those people much higher in their service to this country than mine.
Okay.
And I respect that a lot more than what I did.
So if you could go back, would you rather go to Vietnam? No. Not at all?
No.
Mm-hmm.
I consider myself lucky.
Okay.
But what I'm saying is I think when you're unlucky and you're chosen that you're going, to have the fortitude to go and the strength to go and the courage to be there deserves everybody's respect.
Mm-hmm. And from the people, what do you think of the protesters that were all anti-war? What do you think that all the stuff they're doing?
I thought, you know, I used to be one of them.
Mm-hmm.
So how can I blame them for what they think? I made a conscious decision that I was called up, I was going to go in, and probably of all the protesters, probably 90% of them would have made the same decision because they were all proud of the country that they were in and weren't going to go anywhere else or do anything else. But there were some, people have to understand it, and you hear it in the news, but I don't think it really makes a point to anybody that wars are really fought by the blue collar,
Mm-hmm.
by the poor, by the people without money or influence, and it's very true. If you look at a huge percentage of everybody on a battlefield, you will never find the influential, you won't find the rich, unless they at some point in time thought it was their duty and they really went in to honor their country. You would not see them.
True.
I mean, even at the time that I was going in, if you were a college student, you got a 4-year deferment.
Mm-hmm.
If you left high school and didn't go to college, you were drafted.
Mm-hmm.
Totally unfair.
Yeah. Some people just never given the chance to, find their own ways.
Some people given too many chances.
Yeah.
And that proceeds down, if you take a look, that proceeds down in life. It's not that the people who went there couldn't have become influential and rich. It's that other people had the leg up on them by not going.
Mm-hmm. So you think that in total the war could have been completely avoided? Or do you think that?
I really don't know. I think everybody ought to see the Post,
Mm-hmm.
and that gives a pretty good, what I understand, I haven't seen it yet, but that gives a pretty good recap of how they tried to keep the reason why we were in the war away from the public, the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we were wrong, and I think in many instances we're wrong in how we think we can change the world to be like us, rather than trying to respect the way they are and try and help them be better people doing what they do themselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's just my personal thoughts.
Okay. Well, thank you. I think that's all I have now.
All right.